Good afternoon. This is the PFP June webinar. Nice for you to join us. Today we're looking at some of the interesting truths and difficulties behind R&D claims and how they're doing. I'm really pleased that Adam Bointon from randd has been able to join us, and we will go into some of these interesting issues here. Some housekeeping to start with. If you have any questions, can you use the Q&A, and I will be looking at that quite regularly and putting things through across to Adam to see if he can help us on them. The other thing is we will be sending out the slides and the recording of this meeting tomorrow, so everybody will get a copy of that, and we'll see what we can do from there. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Adam. Good afternoon, Adam.
Good afternoon, thanks, Peter.
Perhaps we can have a go. Let's start from here and see where we can go. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Hello and welcome to this webinar. Thanks for Peter and to invite me here today to just talk about the latest in R&D tax credits, because it's been an interesting sort of few years, and I'm sure it's always been a bit of a hot topic recently. So I'm Adam Bointon. I'm your host today, and I'm the technical director at randd UK. We're a leading provider of R&D tax credits, and I've been involved in R&D tax relief with randd since 2008. And I've helped companies of all sectors and sizes help prepare their claims for HMRC, as well as defending inquiries over the years. So in this webinar, I'm just going to go through the core parts of an R&D tax relief claim. Using HMRC's guidance, I'll try and help you understand what potentially qualifies as R&D and how you can show that someone is also a competent professional. So this will be the bulk of the webinar today on a couple of slides, so hopefully you'll all get something out of it. We'll then also look at the benefits of outsourcing R&D and where that landscape is, rather than trying to do the claims in-house as many businesses used to do. And also highlight some of the warning sounds to look out for when dealing with R&D tax relief and the various providers, so that you can make sure you're getting good value for money by getting your R&D claims right and staying fully compliant. Lastly, we'll do a bit of a salesy pitch and see how R&D UK can help your businesses. And also, importantly, there'll be a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions at any point, just make a note of them and put them on the Q&A, and I'll try and give you an answer later on. So what is R&D? And this is the slide that I'll spend most of the time on today, as it's undoubtedly the most complex aspect of the incentive. So firstly, I think we need to be more specific than the title of this slide suggests. So what we really mean is, what is R&D for tax purposes? So what activity and expenditure qualifies for R&D tax relief? That's the question that really needs to be addressed. Research and development can mean different things to different people and different sectors. The word development itself has different connotations in software, construction, new product development, NPD. But that type of activity doesn't necessarily qualify for R&D tax relief. So what does qualify as R&D for tax? So, as many of you will be aware, HMRC have attempted to codify what they mean by R&D for tax purposes and produced a set of guidelines called the CIRD manual. So that stands for Corporate Intangibles Research and Development, catchy title, which attempts to define what is understood to be qualifying and non-qualifying activity. This manual is essentially based upon the Frescati manual published by the OECD, latest version in 2015. And actually this forms the basis of the majority of such R&D tax incentives rolled out across the world. The entire CIRD manual is contained within CIRD 80,000, but the section we're really interested in, and the main section that HMRC will typically refer back to is CIRD 81900. Actually, the updated 2023 version from DCIT is 81910, but this is the widely known section. So R&D tax relief conditions to be satisfied. And this used to be under the jurisdiction of the DTI, then the BIS, then BAYS, and now it's DCIT, Department for Science, Innovation, Technology. So first of all, the work needs to be in a qualifying field of science and technology. Really, this excludes anything in the arts, humanities, social sciences. Pure mathematics was originally excluded, but actually in the 2023 update was changed to be included. But I've not seen many claims in pure mathematics. There might be some grey areas such as psychology, for example, and this is classed as a social science, whereas psychiatry, for example, would be more in medicine. Education is another field that is not classed as a qualifying science, for example. So where the process gets tricky, though, is when companies are working in such areas but are developing new technologies, predominantly in software, I would say. And this is where it's important to recognise an existence of a competent professional. And we'll come back to that later. So according to CIRD 81900, the official guidance from HMRC, R&D work is eligible when there's advance is significant in the field, there was some degree of scientific or technological uncertainty, work was conducted on the project during the financial year, or certainly costs were incurred during that period, and it is deemed that it could not have been readily deduced by a competent professional. So each of these points has to be demonstrated before HMRC will consider an R&D tax relief claim to be valid. So to do this, it's necessarily to establish the existing state of the field of science or technology at the time the project was devised. This will involve highlighting the problems that existed, which may include systems and processes being inefficient, for example, and the way in which the project sought to address this and advance it in particular. The project has to be working for the betterment of the entire field or science or technology, not just a company level or just an improvement for the business or sector as a whole. Just because a business has never tried something before doesn't necessarily mean it's R&D. This is why routine upgrades and maintenance and aesthetic refinements typically don't qualify as R&D, as these are purely in the interest of a business. We have to demonstrate there was a technological uncertainty that had to be overcome in order for those types of things to qualify. For something to be R&D, it has to seek an appreciable improvement in something, typically measurable or tangible. So that could be quality, longevity, speed, shelf life, you name it. There's lots of different aspects that we can consider to show an appreciable improvement. Generally, this will include making a novel system or process, or altering a system or process to make it more time or cost efficient, or more environmentally sustainable. Undoubtedly, an R&D project will face failures and setbacks, and these are good signs for HMRC. This will show that the project was difficult and technological uncertainty existed. If someone decides to change something and does so immediately, it's unlikely that this counts as R&D. So remember, work and costs need to have been undertaken and incurred on a project in that financial year for it to qualify for R&D tax relief. Projects can span across multiple financial periods, so it's important to establish the baseline at each financial period at the beginning and the end, and the type of work that was done to overcome that uncertainty for each period. You cannot simply regurgitate the same technical narrative year in, year out, which was quite common in the past. Software claims in particular were notorious for this. Having said all this, it's still not that black and white when it comes to establishing whether or not a company qualifies for R&D tax credits. So in terms of a sort of triage approach when considering your clients, what should you be looking out for? So it's important to say from the off that there's no exclusion in terms of sectors that can apply. It's just that certain sectors are riskier than others in terms of generating a compliance check. Companies operating in life sciences and chemical sciences are going to be far less riskier than companies operating in education, health services, food and drink, retail and wholesale, for example. But that does not exclude them from the outset. What's important to consider is the nature of the activity itself. Is it in a qualifying field of science or technology? And this is where software development can really muddy the water, because it is a field of technology that can transcend sectors. So it's important to consider the relevant field of technology, computer science in this case, rather than the application that it's being used for. So is the company trying to make something better? Are they trying to make something new and novel? This can be product related, process related, software service related. This is where it's easy to get a bit confused. New product development is a prime example of this. Just because a product is new to the market doesn't mean that R&D for tax purposes took place to create it. And as I've seen in the past, this is where companies and agents themselves get unstuck with HMRC in inquiries. They confuse the output with the underlying science and technology. Just because something is amazing and making the world a better place is actually of little to no interest to HMRC. What's important to them is, did you have to advance science and technology to get there? And more often than not, when we peel it back, companies did actually. They did advance the underlying science and technology in a particular aspect or component. And often they were aware of this. They just didn't even know how to frame it properly to HMRC. So it's really important to think about the underlying science and technology. If patents are a really good indicator, or even the consideration of applying for a patent. HMRC often asks this question in inquiries, and they tend to use it as a bit of a yardstick. It's not a be all and end all, but actually, if you're getting to that level where consideration of a patent is being thought upon, that's also a good indication. Perhaps most importantly is the question, was it difficult to achieve? Was it uncertain? What I mean by this is, did you not even know from the outset that it could be achieved, or you thought it could be achieved, but you didn't know how? Or others have achieved something in particular, but how they did it is not publicly available knowledge. This is an important aspect. So that knowledge itself is not extant across the field. Trade secrets are a prime example of this, and HMRC and the guidance illustrate how trade secrets can be a barrier. So having examples of failures is essential. It illustrates that the R&D process contained uncertainty. The question becomes, if you achieved it first time, is it really R&D? So this sort of neatly moves us on to the next point. Because competency is an important factor for R&D, in particular R&D for tax purposes. Just because something was uncertain to you doesn't mean it was uncertain to somebody else. If you don't have the relevant qualifications and experience in a particular field to overcome a problem, it just means you were incompetent to overcome it and becomes a company level problem, not a field-wide uncertainty. Now that sounds harsh, but that is certainly HMRC's line when it comes to inquiries and evaluating R&D claims, and they will stick to it, especially given tribunal victories harking back to Haiti in 2019 and more recently Flame Tree publishing in 2024, where the appellant could not demonstrate a credible competency to justify their claim. So at the core of all R&D work is this notion of a competent professional. So one of the, oh, sorry.
Could I just jump in there for a second? Having talked to the revenue and gone through these things with them like you have, this wonderful, I've come across a number of times, put it this way, that the thought that experience isn't good enough, and they want people to have qualifications in it as well. I think that is rubbish, to be honest, and I've always argued it. Have you had this issue?
Yeah, I've had this argument many times with HMRC, and actually I'll come on to that exact point, very, very shortly. You're absolutely right. So, and I'll come across to sort of the recent tribunal case that HMRC lost in that. So, yeah, but I agree with you, Peter. Experience is wholly underweighted compared to qualifications.
What I explained to them was, you can be really qualified and be a surgeon, but it's actually the experience you need, not to cut somebody open, not actually having the bit of paper that says you're a surgeon. But for want of a better one, that makes sense. Yeah, great. The other one, slightly going back to what you had just now, one of the questions I had was on the advancement, and we had a conversation with the revenue, in fact, in the meeting yesterday, about the advancement was actually on one of their products was commercial more than an advance in science. He slightly pushed back on that, but has actually agreed that you can have a commercial advancement, can be okay. What are your feelings on that? Because it's an interesting niche.
Yeah, I mean, instinctively, we would never frame advancement in the commercial aspects. There's always a commercial aspect that people are in, doing this type of work, for a commercial gain. We're all aware of that, but that's not the ultimate objective of the R&D tax credit scheme. Is not a commercial advancement. Whilst that may be beneficial to the end, we have to frame it within a field of science and technology, and then demonstrate the underlying science and technology and the specific aspect of that has been advanced. So it is a bit of a surprise to hear an inspector sort of concede on that ground, because it is quite explicit that a commercial objective isn't necessarily qualifiable, and an advancement in a commercial objective or an achievement is not really what we're looking for. But that is a bit of a surprise.
It was a very interesting meeting yesterday. Anyway, you carry on.
No, not a problem. So one of the key criteria of R&D is that it basically cannot be readily deduced by a competent professional. So whilst it's not particularly clear, the CIRD guidelines 81300 illustrates that a competent professional is someone who is knowledgeable about the relevant scientific and technological principles involved, is aware of the current state of knowledge, and has accumulated experience and is recognised as having a successful track record in a particular field. We can illustrate that they have a particular experience and track record in developing new products and processes within a particular area. That's usually a good way to do that. So proving that someone is a competent professional is an important part of making an R&D tax relief claim. So businesses should provide evidence of the qualifications that the professional have and the training they undergo to verify they are keeping up with the current state of field of science and technology. A competent professional can demonstrate their expertise by clarifying the R&D work they do without relying on jargon. It's something that is vital for compiling an R&D tax relief claim. They'll always say, give us a high-level overview of the advancement. So, as Albert Einstein famously said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. It is the duty of the competent professional to document the work they undertake in the R&D process, and they should highlight where attempts fail and how work in that particular area pivots towards new solutions. Competent professionals do not need to do everything themselves. They can have people work with or for them, but they should certainly lead and oversee the project. So just to go back to Peter's point here, you know, a word of warning on this, but actually to the positive, HMRC massively overweight qualifications versus experience, in my opinion. And, you know, we've had many arguments about it. So who's more competent in the field of machining, for example? Is it the 22-year-old straight out of university with a master's in mechanical engineering, or is it the person that's been on the shop floor with 40 years experience of CNC processes and machine tools built upon an apprenticeship that they started when they were 16 years old? Yeah, I know who I'd consider more competent in that particular field. And it's important to note that HMRC did lose a tribunal versus Get On Board in 2024, where the appellant did not have any formal qualifications in software or artificial intelligence in particular, but over 20 years at the cutting edge of software development in know your customer processes and algorithms. The court gave HMRC short shrift in this example, showing that experience is enough to illustrate competency rather than the reliance on formal qualifications. So in terms of processing claims, so what are the benefits of outsourcing R&D tax relief claims? So from being an easily exploited scheme for businesses to pocket extra cash to a vital asset for innovative businesses, R&D tax relief has undergone a lot of change over the years. Perhaps this is where outsourcing to a specialist R&D tax consultant can be vital. It is hard for in-house accountants to keep track of all the recent changes in the landscape and the guidelines when they have lots of other important work to do. And there are a range of factors that can influence how much a business can claim back in relief. Knowing how to identify all the qualifying expenditure is a real challenge. So R&D tax consultants do specialise in keeping up with the latest guidance, so claims are optimised and credible. So when HMRC sort of started the mandatory random inquiry programme and the bulk inquiries programme, as well as fraud investigation service a few years ago, to verify the submitted claims, R&D tax consultants started defending valid claims as part of their service. So by outsourcing to a specialist, yeah, if this ever happens, you can get back to running your business and rely on the expertise of somebody else to do that for you. So what should you or others as an R&D tax consultant do? So really, a good R&D tax consultant should be advisory, not just someone that's going to just tick a few boxes and go through a process. If an R&D consultant never rejects any projects as ineligible or unqualifiable, then are you an R&D expert when you're trying to pass off ineligible projects? There'll always be some work that cannot be included in a claim, and a good consultant will identify that. Costs that are ineligible, for example. R&D tax consultants should really take the time to really understand the work of a business and why that project is important to them, and how to frame that within the wider field as a whole. If they do not understand the project, then how could they be expected to put a report together to convince HMRC of its eligibility? They'll also work with you so that you can learn more about R&D tax relief to enhance record keeping in the future and improve the validity of future claims. That doesn't mean sticking with a checklist and making the client do most of the work. It means working with them as an advisory person. R&D tax consultants should be the ones compiling HMRC ready documentation that can be used and that meets the current guidelines and utilised in defence of an inquiry if required.
Adam, can I just
yeah, of course,
talk about that one as well? Going back to this meeting, I'm just, as you know, I've said to you earlier, it's a bit staggered by it and whatever. One of the questions he came up with to our accountant was, as is, you often get in letters now, what do you know about R&D? And they will ask the company, what did you do? Where did you get it from? Which is really why one of the questions that comes up in inquiries regularly. So having a competent R&D consultant at that point, I think, is very important. It was interesting yesterday that he brought up our colourful friends, for use of different words, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And how some of them are going to jail for doing really ridiculous claims. You know, the best one we've always had was the R&D claim for a nursing home, because you have to research and develop care packages, which is what one they did. So this is what I know you're going to go on to it shortly, is finding what is a proper consultant to use. Do you agree that yeah, these questions are asked quite regularly, whether you're competent, whether you knew enough about it to be able to do it? Do you feel that our accounting clients here will if they're not doing it all the time, would that be an issue for them?
Again, I think, yeah, it depends on the frequency in which you do it. The problem I find, and you're right, quite often an inspector will say, or HMRC in a letter will say, what's your understanding of R&D tax credits? Have you ever read the BEIS guidelines, or DSIC guidelines as they are now? And then go into those types of questions about the competency, and how are you informed? Did you use an agent, etc. And I think the important aspect, actually, from an agent's perspective, and from my perspective, is that it should be an educational process. People should learn about what R&D looks like, in HMRC's eyes, and how they need to collect and prepare records and evidence, because ultimately an inquiry is just a risk-based approach to generate it, and then a evidence-based approach to demonstrate eligibility. So in terms of keeping up to date, if you're not doing that all the time, we're dealing with HMRC, all the time, and we're up to date with the latest sort of movements, and we've got wide specialisms as well, coming from construction to software to chemical sciences to health and beauty, all these sectors, having a little bit of specialism can help illustrate whether or not something is business as usual compared to its R&D, because that is ultimately the question, and that usually is in the eye of the beholder. But it's certainly being able to educate companies and the people involved to say, well, actually, have you considered this? What about this particular aspect? Or I think that sounds a bit routine. That sounds routine. Was there something more challenging or difficult that you had to do? Was it outside the standard developer toolkit, for example? These are the important questions that need to be asked, rather than just simply relying on the version of the truth coming from the client. There should be an education and an interaction in there to analyze the project. And actually, quite often R&D has taken place, but it's been framed in the wrong way. That's what we often see. Yeah, we often see that.
Yeah, it's drawing out the information, isn't it? Which is the difficult part. Carry on, and I have some more for later.
No.
Thank you.
So yeah, no problem. So are you getting value from your current provider? So, and our tax consultant should act as your partner when making a claim. They should be on hand to guide you through the process and make sure that you understand what's required of you and when your assistance is required. So whether a claim is eligible and to what extent should be made clear straight away, even if this costs the consultant time and effort. All fees and the potential relief should be revealed as soon as the consultant has calculated it, so that clients are not stung with surprise bills. So now we've talked about what a good R&D tax consultant should do, let's turn attention to the point that sort of Peter made and the warning signs of those that might be less reputable. So historically, there have been R&D tax consultants who, give their clients, a stack of forms and then take their cut. In that instance, there's no advisory piece. The bulk of the work is done by the company themselves, who don't really understand it, and they're just going through a process. So yeah, this results in clients essentially doing all of the work themselves and then paying someone else for the privilege. And unsurprisingly, this actually results in a lot of ineligible and rejected claims because it's just not framed properly. So the inquiry programs that HMRC run actually may result in valid claims being queried and ultimately rejected, especially if the consultant themselves is not then willing to defend against it. Yeah, they're not fulfilling their duty as an advisor. A poor consultant will be slow and unresponsive, leaving clients in the lurch and unable to contact them. Sadly, the rise of artificial intelligence has led to some consultants just generating reports using ChatGPT, for example, or a similar large language model, and then not really checking it for accuracy. And actually, they're pretty obvious to spot. If I can spot one in seconds, so can HMRC. So this raises the question of what clients are really paying for if the work is just being outsourced to AI programs freely available. Another big warning sign is the lack of guidance and care offered by the consultants. How can businesses keep better records of R&D work if they're not taught and educated about what will and won't qualify? Now, there's a wider argument about a project and how you define it and timekeeping and what's R&D and what's not, but ultimately there should be an education about what type of projects do qualify and how those can be identified and the costs involved in them. And also consultants may miss out on actual eligible expenditure because they haven't taken the time and effort to explore all avenues properly. And this leads to innovative businesses missing out on the incentive that they are rightly due. So at randd UK, we pride ourselves on being dependable and professional R&D tax advisors and consultants. So with over 15 years of experience, we like to think we've developed a sort of unrivaled knowledge of R&D tax relief. And actually, there's many in the industries that are very well qualified. We've filed over 5,000 claims, and that's been a learning process for us over the years. We've an excellent sort of success rate because we only put forward work we know to be eligible. So to be sure of the eligibility of a claim, we do take the time to get to know every business that we work with. We're 100% focused on our clients and to ensure that we try and fully understand the innovative work that they do and fully support their claims and the claim process within it. We do try and do this to take up without taking up too much of a client's time, but obviously there's always a trade-off. The more a client can devote to that time, the more they'll get out of it. We're happy to do eligibility calls, as to just establish it from the off if there is potential project, and we can work together to put together a technical report and financial schedules that will meet all of HMRC's guidelines. We have a team of experts that will guide clients through the process, and yeah, we really do believe in educating clients and getting them used to the R&D process, even though they may have dealt with another R&D provider before or have done it in another way. You might often find that having that advisory service will benefit them going forward. All of our claims are risk assessed, and if any that we submit gets flagged by the HMRC inquiry programs, we will defend it. So that's what happens when you're confident in the work you create, and you can be confident in defending it from inquiries. Changing world of R&D tax relief. The future of R&D tax relief is an ever-changing one. It's always been under scrutiny. There's always been a time limit of it going forward. But hopefully, R&D tax incentives have been an important part of the Treasury's approach to rewarding innovation throughout the UK. The recent increase in scrutiny has resulted in more administration and paperwork. Things like the additional information form and the advanced notification form have made that process more difficult and onerous, and also trying to reduce the impact of last-minute unscrupulous claims as well. The new merge scheme, the elimination of the old SME scheme and RDEC schemes into a new merge scheme, RDEC for all, is the latest development in R&D tax relief, and things have settled down since its introduction. However, we know R&D tax relief will change again at some point in the future. Governments will revisit it on a year-by-year basis. So that's why we like to keep an eye on all parts of the guidance as it is issued to make sure that we're ready for those changes, and we work with HMRC and their consultative committees to do so. And we'll focus on keeping up with compliance and the changing landscape of compliance, whilst those companies keep on innovating and yourselves keep on innovating as well. So don't just take our word for it. Have a read of these two testimonials from some of our clients, and there's many more on our website and Google reviews if you'd like to hear of more of the people that we've helped over the years. So it's probably time to hear from yourselves.
Right, Adam. You cover obviously disputes when the revenue do pick on these things, which is always a problem when they do. One of the things we were finding early on, which is now I don't think is quite the same, was they were just sending out, the people there didn't know what they were doing, or just as such weren't trained enough into it, so they were just sending out the standard letter saying no, and then no, and then definitely no. And the difficulties, obviously there are ways around this and whatever. How do you sort of approach these bland standard letters as such?
Yeah, so you're right. The nature, and we've seen that quite recently, the nature of the compliance checks that we receive is changing and has changed. And if we do get sort of one you might call a standard letter, it is important to firstly reassure the client, and B, to make sure that we answer that as fully as we can in the first instance. Because quite often you'll find the HMRC and the case office, especially when you're dealing with this sort of bulk inquiries program, where you may get a different case officer each time in each reply. They will often miss evidence and say, well, you've not supplied this, when actually we have. If you go back to this letter dated XX, we have provided such evidence as you requested in your original letter. It's important to be as thorough as we can on the first instance, and not perhaps just boot it back to HMRC in the first instance to just see what comes. Say, are you really interested, as it were? So it's important to not take that tactic these days, and to try and be as thorough and as complete in the first instance as we can, because I think that was sort of the misconception when the sort of bulk inquiries program first started out. You get these letters, you've had the technical report, you've had the financial schedules. You quite often saw a very, very short shrift reply back to HMRC, and I'm not sure that really went down very well with them. So it's important to be as thorough and to take as much care as we can over that first reply, and that will form the basis upon future responses going forward.
I do think the new way of putting claims in it's stopping in most inquiries anyway for now, but I think it's helping a great deal. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, just to sort of, I mean, and HMRC have published this. If you look at the recent sort of consultative exercise that they did. I mean, they showed what their decision-making process was for R&D claims. It's a risk-based automated approach. You know, when you file, there's a reason why you have an additional information form that is submitted online, and that's so that it can go through a computer and goes through various checks at that stage, and then from that it is deemed worthy or not to go under either an inspector's nose or the bulk inquiries team, or it might go to someone to review that case in particular, who will then a person will then decide, should we open an inquiry or not, or is this suitable? You know, that process is purely risk based, and HMRC have not shied away from that. You know, that is the basis of which inquiries are generated these days.
Yeah, I think the fact that we're now initially giving more information probably is reducing the numbers quite considerably, because that risk is obviously going down because they can find reasons for not doing it. So that helps everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always found one of the difficulties has been in the past, and I think it might be changing, and I'd like your view on that a lot of the problems with this is trying to put in writing to explain what the actual R&D isn't necessarily the best way to do it. And trying to get the revenue to come and have a meeting or discuss things with you it's quite often king. And if you can have a half an hour meeting with them, quite often you can save 5 or 6 letters down the line. Is that the way you find it?
Yeah, I mean, there's two answers to that, really. So it depends on who you're dealing with at HMRC. Now, bulk inquiries where you've got the anonymized email address that you're dealing with, they simply will not engage in a meeting with the client. We've requested this multiple times, and it is not part of their agenda. Everything, in their opinion, is evidence-based, and so it is really important to be able to write that technical narrative and provide evidence to support that technical narrative in a way that illustrates the underlying science and technology and the advance upon it. That is a skill in itself, and it's something that needs to be worked with the client, and, you know, as a agent themselves, to be able to establish that at a high level. So, you know, and we have good success at that. You know, we do win lots of inquiries just with written correspondence, you know, and being able to illustrate, now this is what we mean by R&D. And quite often we'll do that. We'll take external claims that we've never prepared ourselves, that have been prepared by the company themselves, or an accountant or another R&D agent. We'll take that on, and it's with bulk inquiries, and we'll go through that process. But to the second point, if you do get a named inspector, if you do sort of come across a bit of a brick wall situation where they go, no, having a meeting can really open the door to that. I mean, I've quite often described it as the inspector really just wants to look at the whites in your eyes and see if you're, you know, talking, if you've got the talk, or are you just making this up? You know, I think there's quite a bit in that to sort of say, well, actually, you'll see the tone of a particular meeting change when the competent professional involved really is able to defend their stance and explain the work that they've done in a very thorough capacity. You'll see the tone of a particular inspector change within a meeting itself. So having that meeting, and it used to be great because we used to do them in person, and you'd come out to a factory, you know, when we had the local offices. That was great, but obviously everything's done on Teams these days. Yeah, it's really important. And actually, going back to sort of the educational side of things, an HMRC inquiry should be an educational process. It certainly used to be, and we've certainly seen more in recent times that the officers have gone back to that, to sort of say, well, okay, how are you thinking about R&D? I like this, I don't like that. You know, have you thought about doing this, you know, going forward? And it has been more of an educational approach, which is what it always used to be many years ago. But yeah, having that meeting is a really good step.
Yeah, it's also education for them as well, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, they're quite often saying, I'm not an expert in this particular, you know, it's like, you know, but so they're quite honest and open about that. So yeah.
I'd like to thank you. I think I haven't got any more questions coming. Oh, new post. Jessica has asked, because we can't speak to HMRC, we're having to request SOLS reviews.
SOLS, yeah. So
Yeah.
Solicitor's Office, yeah. So it's now HMRC Legal, I think it's now called.
Which seems to be a waste of resources comparing with letting us have a conversation with the inspector. This approach has been unsuccessful just this week, where we supplemented our evidence with a video showing the software development. It takes forever, for reviews to take place. I can only just agree with you, Jessica. I think you can probably just say yes as well.
Yeah, we've seen success through SOLS. You know, as I say, yeah, it's been rebranded HMRC Legal, I think now, and they were very stretched part of HMRC. And yeah, it gives you a final opportunity, especially when dealing with bulk inquiries, to provide that evidence and that representation at a sort of last stage, as it were, when perhaps you might feel that they've drawn a line under the matter a bit too quickly. So yes, it is a way you can be successful. Not every time, absolutely not. And then you've got to think about other factors, ADR or tribunal going forward. But SOLS has been a vehicle with which legitimate claims can be overturned. Yeah, but you must submit your argument and supplementary evidence, you know, at that stage. Give them every chance to see what perhaps you've not presented before.
Yes, it's a case of really of them being able to say tick it and say yes, they've got it, as opposed to make them have to think about it, which is, I think, the way, as you say, you have to build these cases together.
Yeah, and I think one of the misconceptions perhaps about SOLS is that, are they just policing themselves? Are they likely to side with themselves? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. It depends who you get on the day, but ultimately there are further options down the line if you are unsuccessful with SOLS HMRC Legal.
Yeah, it's also a matter of how they got out of bed that day as well sometimes.
Correct.
Anyway,
yeah.
I'd like to thank you for this, Adam. It's been very interesting, very useful. As I've said, that we will be sending out everything tomorrow and go from there. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and hope we'll see you very soon in the future on the another talk. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.